Hi everyone, I'm Kirti.
And I'm Sarah, and we're the co-founders of the Wallet Project.
In this video, we will be answering questions that our students asked in our June workshop series, but with the CEO of Fiveable, Amanda DoAmaral. Fiveable is an online social learning platform that creates interactive study guides, streams weekly live reviews, and hosts competitive trivia games to give students the tools they need to pass their AP exams.
Okay, so we'd like to introduce you all to Amanda DoAmaral, the co-founder and CEO of Fiveable, which is a social learning platform that supports AP students after school. Fiveable creates interactive study guides, they stream weekly live reviews, they host competitive trivia games, all to give students the tools they need to pass their AP exams. Amanda, if you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself and maybe give us a little bit more background about Fiveable.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Amanda. I'm based in Milwaukee. I originally grew up outside of Boston and then taught for 5 years in Oakland. So I've kind of done both coasts and now the Midwest. At Fiveable, we started it as an AP support platform to really connect AP students while they were studying, because that's what I taught and the community I knew. But we've since really moving beyond that too. So now we're supporting the whole high school experience. And so content and peer groups and support for college admissions, for SATs, for other classes you're taking in high school. We really want to create like a network where students can find each other for whatever it is that someone else is doing the same thing at the same time.
Thank you. We're so grateful for this opportunity to interview you, and we really hope our students get a feel of how the topics we discussed in our workshops apply to entrepreneurship in the real world through this interview.
I love it. I think there's got to be more entrepreneurs out there. There's a whole lot of problems to solve, so I'm here for it.
Definitely. So we're going to get started with the questions. So our first set of questions that were asked by our middle school participants from our workshops pertain to the topic of you co-founding Fiveable and really what motivated you to do so. So what prompted your initial interest in actually starting the company of Fiveable, and what was your initial goal with the company?
Yeah, so I taught before, and while I was a teacher, you know, there were so many problems to solve. I felt like the school moved so slowly to solve problems for students, and at the end of the day, like, you only get ninth grade once, you only get 10th grade once. And so I felt so frustrated because, you know, we didn't have the right books, we didn't have the right classroom temperature. It was too hot in my classroom, I couldn't get Chromebooks in there. There's so many things, and every time I would ask for something, the school would be like, maybe next year. And I'd be like, okay, well, now you're just giving up on these students is what you're doing. And that really, like, really frustrated me. And so I talked to my students a lot about that and got them really more like connected to each other, because I felt like your fellow students are the only people you can actually rely on. Like, the turnover for teachers is high, the school is not investing in you. You need to band together. And that's kind of what my classroom felt like. It was kind of a collective. It was like, I don't know, like, it was just like us versus the world, you know? Like, I think I cared a lot about AP because it was sort of a form of protest. It was like, they don't think you can do this. What if you do? You know, like, what if you all took it anyways and passed and prove them wrong? And so that's kind of what my classroom felt like. But like many other teachers, I was burnt out. I was very frustrated by my work, like, environment. It was really toxic as like an employee. And so I ended up leaving my classroom, and which was just kind of devastating for me and for my students. But I didn't really know what I was going to do next. I traveled for a while. I worked on a congressional campaign for a little bit. And sure enough, some of my former students started emailing me. They were now in 11th grade with AP US history and had a teacher who, let's just say, was not as innovative as I was. And so they were like, Ms. D, you got to help us. Like, our teacher's not teaching us. We're not going to be ready for this test. We haven't written an essay all year. I think that's an experience that a lot of students, unfortunately, know. And I was on the other side of the country, and I was like, okay, well, I put my teacher hat back on. Like, what can I do today to help these students for tomorrow? And that led me to live stream. I just started streaming from my bedroom, like before COVID, before everybody did that. And quickly was like, there are other students that need this help. There's not, clearly there aren't enough supports for students, that there's a lot of questions, a lot of frustration. And so I just started building a community of students and brought them together in the same way that my classroom did. And so I think the For me, I just started solving a problem that I knew was there. Like I knew students needed support, and so I just started offering them support. And I kind of figured out a lot of the other pieces as I went, but was really, I didn't really like sit down and think like I'm going to launch a business. I never did, and I never really knew I'd get here. But I just started. I just started building. I just started solving the problem and learned along the way of like what I would need to do to monetize it and market it and do all the other pieces that would be important.
Yeah, so I feel like that's amazing. Well, first, it really shows the problems of the education system because like all students face the same problems. Like that shouldn't be normal to say like I could relate to you when you said, "Oh, your students had a teacher who didn't teach them anything." So it kind of sucks to see like that's kind of like an all-around problem, like all around the country. And then it's also awesome to see how you kind of took the initiative to kind of get rid of that problem, at least start somewhere to get rid of that problem.
I think that's the key. I think a lot of times I was just talking to someone just today that is thinking about solving a very different problem, like is not an entrepreneur yet, but is like trying she saw something, a problem that she's like just like yelling about. Like, am I the only one that sees this? Why isn't this solved? Like what are we supposed to do? And she was trying to figure out like, should I build it or should I try to like convince other people that this should exist? Someone else should build it. And I was like, just build it. Like no one can tell you not to. Like if you just build the thing and if you feel really strongly that this should exist, and if you're right that like other students need it, other people need that solution, then you can build a massive business off of it. Right? That's really it all just comes down to like solve a problem for people and just put everything you can into doing that. Just keep trying to make that solution better.
Exactly. So we actually saw that you held like previous positions as like a general manager at the Boston University Student Union before you became a AP Human Geography teacher in Wisconsin. So do you want to tell us like a little bit more about what inspired you to start like getting into teaching, like your initial interest in that education industry?
Yeah. So that BU Central job was while I was in college. My work was a very cool work study job, but I got to work at the like music venue on campus and then kind of worked my way up to be like manager of it and was it's funny that like I think about it now and it was actually this like really good experience for what I do today, but I didn't know that then it was just like a really fun job. Like we were given a pretty big budget. We got like $100,000 a year and we just our task was just fill this space every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Plan an event every week, 3 events a weekend that would get students to come to it. And so we just got to like book bands and like comedy shows and all these different things. And I also hired a staff and handled a schedule. And I had to deal with, employee issues. I had to fire someone once while I was in college, which was like horrifying. But like, girl didn't come to work, like, and so I kind of did a lot of those things. But meanwhile, my major was in education. So I was studying social studies education. So I felt like I lived this like double life in college where I was in these education classes, I was student teaching, and I also was like booking bands and learning how to run audio and like in setting up green rooms. It was so weird. Like one of the one that you might know is Young the Giant that we had booked like before they were even on MTV, which was cool. But anyway, so I the only reason why I was studying education was because when I graduated high school, the only thing I knew about my future was that I wanted a job that I would love. That's the only thing that I had defined. I had no idea what it would be. I just did not want to settle. That's all. That's the only thing I was clear about. And I loved working at a camp before. I worked at like a YMCA camp. And so I was like, if I don't mind waking up at like 8 a.m. to go to work, then that's probably a job that I might be willing to have. And so I switched into education and got my degree in education, student taught, and then ended up teaching right after school. I actually did Teach for America, but I was already credentialed to teach. And so I moved from Boston to Oakland and got placed at a school in teaching history. And so that was sort of a domino effect for me of like, I don't know, things just kept happening. And I was like, I guess I'm just going to keep doing that.
Yeah. So now kind of like you mentioned how at your old job they gave you a budget and stuff, so you kind of had like that freedom to do whatever you want. But now like when you started Fiveable, did you face any financial struggles? Like how did that process of maintaining the business kind of look like?
Like so many financial struggles. That that was the early part. It was so I when I first started to build Fiveable, I was working on this congressional campaign, but I was a fellow. I was like a finance fellow, and so I wasn't really making any money. They were giving me housing, and that was it. And so I quit that job and decided to go full. I wanted to go full into Fiveable, even though I had no money to pay myself and didn't know what I was going to do. So in retrospect, I have no idea how I thought that was okay because I was like 27 and broke. But I was like, okay, I knew what some of the privileges I had. I knew I could move home, that my mom would not, charge me rent and could support me in just like giving me love and care. And so I moved home. I hadn't lived there in like 10 years and just started building. And I was sort of just like, I was trying to make money from like selling some things, but it wasn't really super successful in the early days. And so it was more just about like how I chose to spend money. Like I didn't have a ton of savings left. And so I just put kind of whatever I had left and had to find ways to learn things on my own, to talk to people for free, to get advice, I had to get all those different things. And then I was able to do an accelerator that invested. So they invested $20,000 for 5% of the company. And that was like the very first thing I did. I remember the day that I got the Google ad for that. I didn't even know that those were a thing. I had never heard of them before, but it felt like I remember thinking like, this is like Shark Tank. Like they'll just like give me money. Like I can do I'm just a normal person can do this, which they can. And so that's what I did. And that money was spent very fast. It does not last very long. And so I didn't get another investor for another year, really, but really had to stretch things out and take chances on myself and on people. And also had to like tap into my own, like the retirement savings I had from a teacher, which was still very little, but I had to like cash out all of it, which was also a massive risk that like, I don't know. I think I kept taking the risks, and I think every time we ran out of money a bunch of times. We had to call all of our staff and tell them we couldn't pay them. And I think every time things got really hard, I would. There were times where I was like, should I even keep doing this? Like, what am I doing? Like, this is not. I don't know if this is working. I'm kind of. I feel like I'm failing. I would start to run through this process in my head, like, okay, well, if you quit tomorrow, what exactly would you do first? Like, what would be those steps? And it always just sounded like too much work. And so I was like, or I can send one more email and like try to keep going forward. And so that's kind of what I did. And that mentality that's what allowed us to survive. Cause I just was like, I can't quit. It's just too much work. I don't want to do it. Like I have to figure out a way forward.
Wow, that's so inspiring. And I totally agree with you. You have to keep that mindset up in order to keep going. And one of the things we cover is like failing is a good thing. Keeping that growth mindset is a good thing because then that will lead to success ultimately in the long run. Because I mean, I guess with like failure, I mean, so like success is only a small portion, right? Like you have to fail or like you have to try things out before you get success. So
Yes.
really nice hearing that. So now we'd like to transition into the topic of how you market your company and ensure that your students are getting the right content they need in order to do well on their AP exams. So one of our first questions is when you like co-founded Fiveable, how were you feeling when you left your teaching job to start your own company? And what was one of the biggest challenges you faced while starting your company?
So for me, there was a gap between when I left teaching and when I started Fiveable. They happened so close that it seems like I did one to start the other, but I didn't. I really I had hit a point in teaching where I just was like, I don't know, I just felt like I was just hitting a wall. I felt like the level of impact I could create was only as big as my own classroom. And that was super important, but this was like right after the 2016 election, and I just was like, there are so many problems to solve. I don't know if I'm making the biggest impact in this room. Like I have 120 kids a year. There's more students that need help. There's more problems. That's why I went and worked on a campaign, because I just felt like, how do I get involved? How do I make change? I was so like, as everybody was, just like, ah. And so I that's how I felt, and didn't know that this is the path that I would take. But I've ultimately found that like my place in making change is in connecting students, because I feel like, you only know what you know. And so if I can connect students to find out that, hey, why doesn't my school offer that class? Or why is your teacher better than my teacher? Like, why do I have this? Then you start to see then students organizing and like fighting back for things. And so that kind of became in the marketing place too, of like how I wanted to reach students. I didn't want to go through their teachers. I didn't want to go through the schools. I wanted to reach students directly. And so that meant that I had to be where they are, which is Googling things on social media, telling their friends. And so we somehow had to tap into that sphere. And that's sort of how we then were able to build the community that we have now. It had to come bottoms up. It couldn't be tops down.
Yeah, so kind of going on that track, how did you go about sustaining the platform, and like what strategies did you employ in order to stay in the loop among the many other AP resources out there?
So one thing I did right away was hire students. I felt like I knew I had an advantage because I was a teacher. I had spent so much time around students. And so I even like went to some of my former students and hired a few of them. I needed to be around them more. But then I also knew that like as we started growing the team, that my teammates needed that experience too. And so I kind of figured like, if I can find students to work on this with us, they know themselves better than we know them. I mean, people joke about the like gap in generations, but it's like a real thing. Like I graduated high school in 2008. We just had Facebook. Like that was it. There was no other platform. We had MySpace too, but that was sort of fizzling out. But you know what I mean? Like it's like so different. Now, there's so many other platforms now, ways that students communicate online, that like I didn't even watch YouTube in high school. Like it's so different. And so I had to surround myself with students who were like actively in high school right now, seeing all the different landscape that's out there, like on social media. How do they think? What do they do after school? Like I remember like finding out about Discord a few years ago and just like had no idea. And I was like, this is wild. Like there are all these students that are interacting here. And I think that has actually given us a much bigger competitive advantage over time, because now I feel like we understand students in a way that a lot of the other ed tech platforms don't. They either are coming at it in a way that they think that like students don't know better, so we have to tell them. That's, I feel like, what you get from like the Kaplan's or the Princeton Review. It's very top down, right? It's like we have the answers and you don't. And then you get other platforms that are, it's all just really fragmented. And so I think the way that we've been able to understand what's actually going on and what's needed is because we just surrounded ourselves with our users. I mean, it's really what it was. I mean, for us, it was students, but I think for any entrepreneur, it's like you got to spend a lot of time with your users. And the best thing you can do is solve a problem that is a problem for you too. But if you really like immerse yourselves in it, then some of the things that you should do next become really obvious. Like launching a Discord server became really obvious because we're like, obviously all the kids are here anyways, we should be here. And and like we wouldn't necessarily have known that unless we were already in the space.
Yeah, so you previously mentioned you started to hire students when you were creating this platform, and um, I just wanted to know, like, what did the process look like when it came to ensuring that your content of Fiveable was of quality, and how were you able to like refine your content, and how did like the posting and everything go?
Yeah, at first I was the main creator. So at first I must have written like 50 blog posts or something wild. I remember just like I kind of had this list of we had started with the histories, so I knew those. We had a couple of social sciences like psych that I also could support. which was just kind of a benefit that I had, just because social science, social studies is like so many different topics. So I was lucky that I had that experience. But I started to sort of like think, okay, like what are the different blog posts that we could write? I can take a unit and break it down. I can, other things that students might search, or like a push timeline, right? Like, or I was doing some keyword research around it, but I was also just trying to think like, what would a student Google? Which I just kind of knew, like, well, they're going to Google AP Psych Unit 4, or AP World, like Silk Roads. And so I was like, okay, how can I basically create these different posts? And so I wanted to create a post for every unit, and there's a couple of other ones I want, like best Quizlet decks for AP Psych. And so I started to like kind of come up with a bunch of those ideas, and I literally just like sat down and wrote and just wrote and wrote and wrote. And you kind of create like templates over time, right? Like they're not all that different, but like let me just like gather up all the materials. So I think I sort of set the first bar for the quality of content, and then we started to hire other students and teachers to write more as we started to build out like study guides. So for study guides, the very first study guide I wrote was for AP World Unit 4, because that's the time of the year that we were at. And I was like, let me do the one, let me see if students even want this. And then as we started to realize like this is going to be awesome, we need to write all of these. It still took us like a year to write all of them, but we just hired a big group of people to do it and to edit it. And it kind of made this like whole massive process through like Trello of like, okay, you write this, then this gets edited. So it was a very complex, like taped together system, but it worked. And now we have all this content, and that's what drives most of the engagement.
Yeah, this is all so cool because, like, personally, when I was studying for AP exams, I would Google these things like this one unit from AP Human Geography, like Unit 1. And then the
Yes.
thing that would pop up would be like Fiveable. So one question I had was around the idea of search engine optimization and how you're able to attract students to your platform.
I love SEO. Like, I think it's like the coolest thing. And I wish that I had even known that that was a thing in high school, because I may have studied it, like I just think it's fascinating. But I think that in the early days, it was basically two things driving that decision. One, I didn't have any money. And so I needed to rely on something that I could do. I couldn't just pay for ads. I didn't have any money to do that. That would have run out really fast. I couldn't hire someone to do something for me. I couldn't pay influencers. So I needed to do something that I could do. And I could learn SEO. There's a lot of content out there to help to teach you it. So I learned as much as I could, and I knew I could write the content I needed to write. And then the second thing is I wanted to reach the students directly. And I know that everyone is Googling their homework. And so I just figured, I also was building an Instagram channel at that point too. And so I figured if I can do both of these things, I'm going to reach the students. And that's how we will then build. And so my co-founder, who was one of the first people that joined Fiveable, I knew he had a lot of experience with SEO. And so he sort of I maybe went from like 0 to 0.5 with our strategy. He went from like 0.5 to like 1. And then another person that we had that came in a little later, they really took it like a huge jump. But he really optimized a lot of the website and had more of the technical knowledge, whereas I had more of the content knowledge.
Yeah, so that's amazing to see how kind of, a team is essential. You can't really do everything. You want to do everything yourself, but sometimes it's just not possible. You don't have the resources or like the knowledge to do it. So kind of like our last set of questions pertains to like how you go about planning the future growth of Fiveable. So like what are some ways that you come up with new ideas to market your platform, especially because so many things are evolving, students are changing, their needs are changing. And what does that thought process kind of look like?
Something I think that's hard, that was always hard for me in the early days, but has gotten a little easier over time, is just really trying to answer the question like what are we building? Like, I know it seems like an easy thing, but it's like really having like a far out vision, because when you're first starting out, I think it's hard to think super big, because you don't even know that you can do that, or like how you would possibly get there. you're sort of in the day to day of just like, we just need to survive the week or like the month. And so you're not even thinking about this like massive vision. And so it was hard for us while we were sort of in survival mode to do that. And now we've, especially in the last few months, I've really had the time to like really think like big picture about what I want this to be. Like what can this look like if we put all these pieces together right? And for marketing is really just a series of experiments. You know, we know that SEO is our top channel, but we have to experiment with ways to create more content. Um, there's a lot of things that we can be doing on social, and or even just like how to build like referrals between students. And so a lot of it is like, and this is true on product too, a lot of it is like coming up with ideas and just putting anything out there. Like in your head, you might be thinking like, this is not a good idea, but it's worth just saying out loud just because it might be. And so sometimes we'll do these little like brainstorming sessions where we'll just kind of write down like ideas we have. We have to have a goal that you're trying to reach. So maybe we're trying to get more students on our website or get more students to create accounts. Like there's some goal, and then we'll just brainstorm ideas. And 9 out of 10 of the ideas are terrible, right? Like you'll say things, you're like, I don't know if that will ever work. But then every once in a while you get like a few good ideas. And then the trick is just trying them as fast as you can. Like the feedback loop is really important. Like how fast can you take an idea from an idea to a full experiment? You know, can you do it in a few days, in a week, in a few weeks? Or is it going to take months? Like sometimes things take months to really find out if it works. SEO takes months. SEO really took like a year, which is fine, but it's like if it takes a year to learn something, then you're not gonna be able to try that many things. So it's really just a matter of like coming up with those ideas and then prioritizing and deciding like that's our best idea, and we can, do it the quickest. It won't take that many people to do it versus like this other idea that might be really good but would take a lot of time to build and think through. And so really just like prioritizing the ideas is everything. That's really like, that's kind of my job now, is like know where we're going and make sure everyone is like has what they need and is kind of headed in the right direction.
Now, kind of bouncing off that, how you said to prioritize, those specific goals that you have. What difficulties and challenges did you kind of face with that growth that, especially in the initial stages of Fiveable being a new company or even now when you're well established? And how do you kind of overcome those difficulties when you kind of hit that roadblock?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different problems there's always some new problem that comes up. Like when COVID first hit and our traffic was exploding, it was like, how do we manage these chats? We're getting chats all the time. How do we can't I can't be here and over here and over here. And so that problem to solve was like, we need more people or we need bots to help answer these chats. Sometimes it's like, okay, we're running live events. How do we get students to attend? And so it's really like, we try to come at everything with a like problems to solve mentality. It's really easy in a conversation to think about all the things you should do. But the reality is like, if the things that you're doing are not solving a problem, then it may not be worth doing, at least right now, right? Like we really just try to come up, like when we talk to our team, like our team is remote. And so a lot of what we do is we have to write things down for each other, and we don't meet all the time. And that's actually really useful because then it forces you to think like, if I think we should do something, I have to really be able to explain why I think we should do it and why that's going to actually help us out. It's going to make us work faster or more efficiently, or it'll make the experience better. Like there's, the problems to solve are all very similar. Like it's like make the product better, get more students, make the team happy. Like there's all these different big buckets. And so everything kind of goes back to one of those things. But I have to be really specific as to why this thing will solve that problem and why this is the best thing to do to solve that problem.
Yeah, so one of our final questions is, in general, what piece of advice would you give to middle school girls looking towards the business path or looking towards like exploring other careers and keeping an open mind?
I think the biggest thing is like knowing what's possible. when I was in middle school and high school, and even like not that many years ago, I thought I had to have some sort of credential, degree, program, something that I've done to prove my worth, right? To say that I'm qualified to do this. And I think the thing that I've learned over time is that you don't necessarily need that. Those things can help you. They can help you network, going to college for business. It can give you skills. But in reality, like the best thing that you have is the thing that you are passionate about. And if you really want to build something, like there's no like milestone you have to hit before you can start building it. Like anyone can do this. There really aren't any rules as to like, you know, what you have to be. Like we just acquired a company that was built by a 16-year-old student. And now his college is basically paid for because he sold his company to Fiveable. And so when you think about that, it's like he just started building. He just started building the thing that he thought him and his friends could like to use, and then realized like, oh, there's something cool here, and we saw value in it too. And so I think like I think it's just important not to create barriers for yourself. There will be plenty of obstacles for you. Don't let the ones in your head become the ones that hold you back, right? Like I hear this a lot. Like people will disqualify themselves. They'll say like, I was going to apply for that thing, but I didn't think I would get it. So I didn't apply. I'm like, don't disqualify. You don't know what they're going to say. Just apply. Like let them tell you no if they're going to tell you no. And so I think that's sort of that's the mindset that I would want to see middle school girls have, because the more you just think like that, the more like you can literally do anything. Like there's no one that's going to stop you. And that makes me really excited to think about all the things that they'll build in the future.
Those are all the questions we had for Ms. DoAmaral today, and we really appreciate her taking the time out of her day to be here with us.
Sarah and I will be interviewing a female entrepreneur every month in order to answer the questions brought up in our workshops. So please like and subscribe in order to stay tuned for future interviews and workshops. We will also be linking our website and Instagram, as well as Miss DoAmaral's company, in the description box below. Please go check out her wonderful work. Thanks for watching.